Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of The Suspense is Killing Me. I'm Lucas Marino, and today I'm over the moon with, I don't, no pun intended, with the, with the opportunity to talk with the one and only Todd Keisling.
Hello. Happy to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Thanks for being available to meet. What a run of guests lately. I didn't impart this upon you beforehand, but you're kind of a big deal. You're following Clay Chapman, you're following Robert Atone, you followed a whole bunch of cool people that if they all knew you were right behind them, they no doubt would have supported uh supported that in the episodes.
Yeah, Clay probably would. I don't know about Rob, though. He's a questionable suspect.
Very, very questionable. In fact, we're considering just banning him from the show indefinitely, but
Probably should. It's
yeah.
it's the only way to be sure.
Yeah, you hear that, Rob? If you're watching, listening, um, I'm making it up. Actually, please come back, Rob. I miss you already. So yeah, we interviewed him for Nocturnal Creatures, and then had time with Clay for Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, and
Fantastic book, by the way.
what a trip that book is.
Yeah.
So we've done some post-apoc, we've done some cryptid. Emma Murray came on for her The Drowning Machine and other obsessions, which is her collection, which is just dark, weird, grief-laden stuff. And then it was like we need some good cosmic horror up in here, and so Todd brings the goods with the Sundowner's Dance.
Yes. This right here, it is for sale. Well, pre-order at the moment, but you can buy it.
It's so beautiful, and this is from Shortwave.
Yes.
And Alan is the hand at the rudder of design on this book. So what was that like working with Alan? Were you I'm sure you were pretty like stoked to be able to collaborate with a fellow designer.
Yeah. That's one of the main reasons why I wanted to work with him is because I respect him as a designer, and he has a very acute design sense about everything he does. Like, there's a presentation, he cares about the presentation, and that matters to me as a designer and also as a writer. Like, I want, if my name's going on the cover of a book, I want it to look as good as it possibly can, and I'm very particular about it. That's why I've done several of my own covers, because in the past I've worked with publishers that I didn't feel comfortable or trust enough to do the book justice.
Right.
But Alan is one of those designers that I will happily work with anytime I can. And he knocked it out of the park.
I love that color selection on the cover because it's like so rich, although it's subtle. It's like it's such a great balance of this like sleepy kind of cul-de-sac in a neighborhood with this awesome.
And it's all him. Like, he asked me in our initial meetings, like, did I have an idea for a cover? And what I saw in my head was like, basically a riff on the cover, the old VHS cover of The Burbs.
Oh, I love that movie.
But instead of Tom Hanks standing there with a spatula, it's the old folks congregating around the meteorite.
Gotcha.
And he took that angle, but neither one of us were feeling it. And so he, a few days after that, I didn't hear anything, and then he hits me with this, a draft of this, and I'm like, dude, this is fucking perfect. This is, you nailed it.
Awesome. Yeah, he really did. I mean, it's such a phenomenal job. And I don't have my hands on the physical copy yet, and I cannot wait to get my hands on physical copies. But I've had enough time spent with Alan talking about the book and having an opportunity to see all your social media about it. And I just immediately was just in love with that cover. It steps off the shelf so nicely, but it's very classic and classy and well balanced. I think it's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I I told him, like, in my mind, the book is very much like an old style pulpy sci-fi horror story,
Mhm.
and I kind of wanted it to have that vibe, which is why we chose the title font that we did, because it's very classic horror
Yeah,
80s styling.
that's awesome. That's got such a cool presentation, and the book does not disappoint whatsoever. Sometimes you get and I know, it'd be kind of hard to not say that to the author to his face on the podcast interview, but there are times when I'm reading a book that I like, and I'm like, okay, this is cool because I love all kinds of subgenres. And I love different types of voices when it comes to an author's work. And you've got such a wonderfully direct yet polished and uh like colorful voice at the same time. And I think there's a certain amount of time that it takes to get that right in a book that is beyond like, hey, break out the thesaurus while you're writing and get to step into the words people have to go look up, to make it seem more colorful. You have this very direct way of providing that color in such a digestible, succinct way. I think it's a fine demonstration of writer skill, and it lends itself really well to cosmic horror because I think there's a magical element to cosmic horror
Yeah,
that can easily pull people into getting a little on the fringes of that direct writing style. So I think you pull that off wonderfully.
thank you. I really appreciate you saying so. Yeah, I've been at this. Let me think for a second. 2000s, yeah, 19 years.
Wow.
And I mean, I've been writing my whole life, but I didn't really start I my first book wasn't technically published until 2006,
Gotcha.
and had wider release in '07. Um, but I approach stories like I'm sitting down across from you and I'm going to tell you about something that happened.
Hmm.
And like I try to balance, the $5 words with a direct conversational style that will reach the most people, without talking down to them.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Very relatable.
Um, so, that I think that is one of the, you know, secret spices of the recipe, I
Yeah.
would say, that, makes my work what it is. And, and I try to approach cosmic horror through with that angle, that lens, because you read a lot of like classic cosmic horror, like Lovecraft, for example. Love him or hate him, he did kind of pioneer the
Yeah.
genre,
Sure did.
and he was a very problematic person. But and his writing today is extremely dry.
Hmm.
Like I ate up his work when I was a teenager because I was reading similar stuff in school with the same kind of like stiff dialect, but he was
Hmm.
also very much like into the visual presentation, except when it came to his cosmic entities, because they're so indescribable they would drive you mad.
Yeah.
Well, like I can appreciate the madness aspect of cosmic horror because we can't even comprehend fully like what these things are,
Hmm.
but I also want to make it as approachable as possible for people. So I try to find ways to describe it that they can relate to,
Hmm.
even if it is something that is maddening to look at.
I love that. Well, I mean, you definitely pull it off. Um, and I've never written cosmic horror, so it's exciting for me to indulge um, in other people's work in the subgenre and kind of run around in there with my handheld. by these, fantastic writers. I mean, uh, the other element I picked up on immediately, in your writing was the pacing, right? Your story's pacing. You don't Todd Keisling does not write short books. So that to me is like a pacing challenge
Wah
because
wah.
it's like, and I'm not saying that's not to say they're too long. I want to make sure I specify that. When I see a big old chonky boy, I'm thinking this is a pacing challenge for a writer to be able to keep a reader as engaged in this deep of a story. And yours doesn't feel like that is a concern whatsoever. I mean, there wasn't a single point in this where I was thinking we were spending too much time anywhere. And even some of our more, I could say our modern masters like Stephen King, um, and Dean Koontz to some degree, and other very popular, marketable authors, have been known to not necessarily pay as close attention to pacing. So your pacing felt wonderful in this story. I just felt like I was in the pocket the whole time.
I would have to attribute it to the editors who had passes and the feedback I got on the book. You mentioned that I write long books. That is historically true. Devil's Creek is my longest, and I don't want to do that to myself ever again. But Sundowner's Dance wasn't even supposed to be a novel. It was supposed to be a novelette, and the original story concept was going to be tied up in 15,000 words.
Oh wow!
And I realized about 11,000 words in that there was no fucking way. And so I originally put it aside for a while, because I originally started writing it in late 2018. It was after I had finished rewrites for Devil's Creek, and I just did not want to jump into another book.
Wow.
I wanted to do, focus on shorter fiction. And, I set it aside. I didn't, I try to keep my drafts and stuff because you never know.
Right.
And, I got an invite to an anthology from Doug Morano a few years ago. It was for Shadows Over Main Street, Volume 3. Suburban horror, cosmic horror, but in suburbia. And I'm like, okay, cool. This story, if I could trim it down to about 6,000 words, 5,000 words, there's a really cool seed in here. I just gotta, find it. So I started digging into it again and revising it with the intent of shortening it. And I realized, oh, yeah, this is a book that, I refused to acknowledge that it was a book. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be a novella. Sorry, Doug, this is getting bigger than I thought. So I'm going to have to back out. But then, I reached that point where, okay, I can, okay, I think I've got about 10 to 15,000 words more to go. And then we have a novella. And then one of the protagonists' kids showed up at the door of the main protagonist. Lisa showed up at Jerry's door, and that wasn't planned. That was one of those moments in the writing where you realize you are recording the story. You're not actually making things happen. And she showed up, and there was a conversation, and I realized, well, I can't just introduce her and then wrap this up. There's more to her. There's more to this relationship. And that's when I finally conceded and said, okay, this is a novel, but it's going to be a short novel. So the first draft was actually only 62,000 words.
Oh, okay.
And I sent it out for feedback because I was very, very concerned about it, because it was a story that I resisted every step of the way because of its subject matter. And I wouldn't get out of my own way enough. I felt like, and I was right. I sent it out for feedback to some trusted friends. I got very good feedback from my friend Laurel Hightower. Shout out to Laurel. Buy her
Shout
books.
out to Laurel.
She gave me excellent feedback, which I, implemented into a second draft, and it grew by about 10,000 words. And then thinking, I did another pass on it, bringing us up to a third draft. It didn't really change that much, and started querying agents. That's where I met Becky at StokerCon, and that was the book that I pitched her. And I signed with her. She started shopping it around. She gave me really good notes on it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that became draft number 4. And then we made the deal with Shortwave, and Alan brought Marissa Van Uden on board to give another round of edits, and she was fantastic. I've already recommended her to another author pal of mine.
Excellent.
Working together. She's a great editor, and all the pacing, all the the tightness of it, that's her. Like, because I'm one of these writers who I tend to inadvertently write out of sequence. So, like, for an example, I might write the first sentence of a paragraph, but that sentence actually belongs at the end of that paragraph.
Right.
So I spend a lot of time when I'm, kind of self-editing, rearranging things. But you know as well as any writer, when you're that close in, you can't see the forest for the trees. Well,
right.
Here comes Marissa, and she's like, okay, this works and this works, but what if we move them around and switch their places? So the big reveal at the realtor's office, that wasn't initially where that reveal happened. That actually happened earlier.
I could see that.
And I realized, she made a great point. She's like, this is more effective if you move it up to here. And everything kind of builds to it. And that's the sign of a great editor. They're not really looking for flaws per se. They're looking for ways to make what you have even better. And Marissa nailed it. So I have to credit her and Becky's feedback and Laurel's feedback for making the book what it is today.
Oh, it's so good. I mean, that feels natural.
Yeah.
It feels natural. Yeah.
Becky's feedback is what made it add another 20,000 words. And Marissa helped me make sense of it and tighten it all up and everything. And yeah, I'm really proud of the end result. It's likely the tightest book I've written. Coming in at I think we got it down. I think it's now 92,000 words, which was my target. I wanted a book that was 90K, because that's always the sweet spot, when you're out on submission. And that's how we got there.
Wow. I loved it. The pacing, you can feel, I can feel that the milestones in the book are well plotted and planned out. So that's great to hear that you had that kind of feedback from not only I think oftentimes people assume that when we talk about editors, they're not sure how much of it is developmental and how much of it is copy line, and it's all of it. When you have a really good editor, it's all of it. You're not just looking for someone to check spelling and grammar. You're looking for someone to help you make a better story. That's so good. So for those that aren't familiar with the premise of Sundowners, and I feel like it's really important to to bring this up now before we try to unpack some themes, because you have a lot of different themes in this book. Grief, mental health, aging, stages of life, expectations of society for people at certain stages of life. There's this natural progression and pull as we age to go down a path. Some people are a little bit like, I guess you could say, more, you know, more naturally suited to some paths than others are. And we also have like the very complex topics of like medical diagnoses like dementia,
Mhm.
which to me is a health is a mental health, obviously, um, a theme, but it's also a very specific um, diagnosis that has a lot of relevance in this story. Um, so we've got Jerry, who's an older gentleman who's widowed by I think 2 years, right? His wife had
Yeah.
passed. His wife Abby had passed 2 years prior, and he finds himself in this new neighborhood. We'll just say that,
Yeah.
and things quickly it becomes apparent rather quickly that this things are not normal around here, and it starts
No.
with things like late night parties and maybe some things running around on your house while you're sleeping. Um, but definitely, it's definitely not meeting his initial expectation of sleepy, retired community where people might interact during normal hours. And
Yeah.
so, where did Jerry come from? I remember when I started reading, I was like, I've got to ask Todd where this main character originated from, because he probably doesn't fit the standard mold of a like a main character in a cosmic horror book.
No, Jerry is in his 70s. I know his exact age, but I forget what it is offhand. I'd have to look at my notes. But like he is in his 70s. Um, and he's named after my late grandfather who passed away in 2000. Uh, my way of honoring him.
Mm.
And he came from a lot of self-reflection on my part. He's very much how I imagine myself to be in 30 years.
Mm.
And I wasn't even, you know, I wasn't even in my 40s when I started writing this. But, some external factors happened in my life that heavily influenced Jerry and influenced me to really dig into the anxiety aspect and the depression aspect of his psyche. So, in I guess it was summer 2022, like a few months after I picked the novel back up. My wife, Erica, discovered a lump on her breast.
Oh.
And, we went through the whole, you know, scheduling appointments, getting a biopsy, and the nightmare of, the US healthcare system. And that time after the procedure with the biopsy to waiting on the results is like this 2 week limbo where your life has basically stopped. And in that vacuum of time, I spent a lot of late nights into dawn lying awake thinking about what my life would look like, one, without her,
Mm.
two, you know what if I had to, grow old without her? Because, we were talking before this, we both have several, mental health deficiencies
Mm.
or disabilities, I should say. And we kind of complement one another. Like what I avoid, she's fine to handle, and vice versa.
Mm.
And like, it would be like, cutting yourself in half, like, so taking half of you away, and like, well, now what do you do?
Yeah.
And so happy to say that, the mass was just a cyst. It was benign, and she's free and clear. She just had her checkup last month, as a matter of fact.
Excellent.
But for that span of time, I was looking at a possibility of, having to deal with the C word and what that, would entail. And, I'm a worst case scenario kind of thinker, which is why I have such anxiety, or anxiety is why I'm worst case scenario thinker.
Mm.
So you're kind of, you're sitting there, you can't sleep because you're worried about your wife, but you're also worried about, what things would look like. How am I going to function without her? And, she's my best friend. We've been together almost as long as I've been doing this professionally. And, we've been, we're like 17 years married
Mm.
this September. And, I realize relatively I'm relatively young. I'm early 40s. I'm middle age. But for me, the possibility of having to start over scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
So I, I knew I was writing an elderly character. So I took a lot of that emotion and a lot of that feeling and I put it in Jerry, and I found ways that made sense in the story for these things to manifest and for him to tackle. And, because one of the things I'm trying to get at in the book is that it's not too late to start over, but you
Mm.
don't have to let go either. Um, that's why even though she is not present, physically in the story, his late wife, Abigail, is ever present in his mind.
Yeah, she is.
And, she's kind of becomes the voice of his conscience. And that's how, I always like to get into the heads of my characters and really like attribute their thoughts to other people in their lives, because
Mm.
I do that. I don't know if that's normal. It's probably not. But to me, like you have such a tight relationship with someone and you've been with them for so long that their language kind of becomes your language and
Right.
vice versa. And so their little witty remarks and, their little isms that they always say on a regular basis, they become ingrained in you.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, so if you take that away, you would still have this person in your
Mm-hmm.
heart and in your mind. And, you know, what better way to explore that than by someone who's lost that person in their lives? And, here's a guy who has basically given up. He's ready to just die and, you know, get it over with, because to him there's no point in going on.
Yeah. You get this sense in the beginning that he's just kind of going with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
He's just going to play out the rest of his time as is expected. And he's not really too concerned about how that goes. He just kind of wants to be alone,
Yeah,
you
he's
know?
still grieving, and
Yeah.
he wants to be the guy that just kind of exists and comes and goes on his own accord and doesn't want to be pestered. And I could very much see myself as that elderly person who lives on the corner of the street where everybody crosses the street to avoid walking in front of his house. Because he's cranky, he's grumpy, he just wants to be left the fuck alone.
You're just going to sit on your porch and throw stuff at people that walk.
Yeah, just scowl at kids as they pass on their way home from school. uh and I wanted to explore that, like what makes a person like that.
Mm.
And the conclusion I reached is that it's because, when you've lost the most important thing in your life, nothing else seems to matter.
Mm.
Like, what's the point if you don't have this one thing that was giving you purpose and reason?
Right.
So, that all went into creating Jerry Campbell.
Well,
Go ahead.
you brought his wife up and how she's this active voice in his head.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a point where I stepped back because she does play such a significant role in his internal dialogue. Like, like it's almost like 50% his thoughts and 50% her thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And in balance when he's thinking. And I thought about this in the context of like, because I do a lot of this kind of, I always question whether I'm creating a voice in my head based on a memory of someone and what I'm expecting or wanting them to say rather than what they probably are saying. And I think it's easier when someone's alive and in your life to be able to attribute that to yourself, because you're just like, it's a tool of like, I can hear my wife saying something. She's probably just said it, or it's been recent. But as someone who becomes widowed, as time, and you allude to this a good bit in the book, like that, how time may skew memory, and
Yeah.
um, it makes you wonder if we start to hear a voice that we're more in control of than the person that passed. And if they're, because I write ghost stories, so I'm always thinking, who's really talking here?
Yeah.
Is it like, is this his wife really speaking to him, or is it his own thoughts about what she would most likely say, or what
Yeah.
he would want her to say?
I think it's most likely him imagining what she would say,
Hmm.
uh, to him at any given moment regarding whatever problem he's facing.
Right.
And, because I didn't want to go into that's a can of worms
Oh
when
yeah.
you put the suggestion that it's someone else talking to him. And can of worms, no pun intended.
It's two worm puns
Yeah,
already.
gratuitous wormage. It's in the content warnings. Uh, you know, as certain elements get introduced, and because I'm being very vague here because you haven't read that last 40%
That's
of the book
right,
yet.
people.
There are certain elements that get introduced where he starts to question, you know, or rather, this thing that gets introduced starts to co-opt his wife's voice
Right.
as a means of controlling him. And, I didn't want to jump to that right away. I wanted it to be a gradual thing. And it's not just him
Hmm.
who experiences this.
Right. Yeah, because he's not the only widow.
No,
Nope.
no. I mean, this is an over 55 retirement community in the Poconos.
That's
There
right.
are plenty of, widows and widowers in Fairview Acres.
And none of them so far, as far as I've seen, have a big champagne glass tub, which I'm a little upset about, because that's that's like the Poconos thing.
Yeah, it is. I tried to avoid that.
Where's my champagne glass hot tub? No, I'm just being stupid, but yeah, I found that, like, when I started to recognize so first of all, I started reading this unaware it was a cosmic horror book. I was
Okay.
just like, I'm going in blind. I don't want to know about the story. I don't want to know anything. I just want to pick the book up and start reading. And so I love the discovery that comes along with like that kind of reading experience, because to me, it's almost like a gift, because when you go to a store and you're shopping and you find a book that you might be interested in, you've read the back cover description and you've got a little bit of a nugget in your head about what's going on here.
Yeah.
I didn't have to do that with this book. I was like, I know this is going to be great. Alan's publishing it. Todd wrote it. I cannot wait to read it. I just want to open this thing and just see where Todd Keisling takes me when he grabs me by the hand and we run off into this book. And as it starts to unfold, I've got a million questions. I'm like, what's going on in this town? Is this going to be a possession story? Because there were some elements that made me think maybe there's possession at hand here. Then I was like, wait, is this going to be supernatural because of the role that Abby's voice is playing in his head?
Yeah.
And as it starts to unfold, I'm like, oh, this is cosmic horror. And I had this moment of it, like, just thought about like how well Cosmic pulls on all of these strings. Like, Cosmic has elements of possession, elements of supernatural intent, elements of paranormal activity. Like, all these things kind of feel like they come together in the cosmic thread. Of course, there's a lot going on here in this town physically that is
Yeah.
also representative, like heavily skewed into the cosmic horror. For those that don't know, there was a meteor involved in this story.
Yes.
And so
That's actually. Sorry, go ahead. I
now
cut you.
you're probably getting ready to explain what I was going to ask. I was going to say, so where did this seed come from to take this, what could have just been a potentially, this could have been a grief horror novel
Mhm.
about a widow, or it could have been a very easy possession story because of we've got people that have passed, and we've got the potential for supernatural elements to be at play here. But you specifically went into like a dyed in the wool cosmic horror story. And where did that element kind of introduce itself to you when you came to this plot? Did you start there?
Uh, so I don't remember exactly where the idea came from,
Hmm.
but the original story was, I mean, we bought our house in 2015. I was still getting,
Hmm.
I've lived in this town my whole life, but being a homeowner versus being a renter is a completely different experience. And
Yeah,
I don't know, I was more exposed to the town itself and my neighbors. And so, like, it could have started there, but uh, I had this idea for a community full of people who are worshiping the moon.
hmm.
And I had written a line on a post-it note when I was at my day job at the time, and that said, "The worms in my brain dance at nightfall."
Did you leave that on your desk?
I did. It was on my monitor at work for several years until they finally kicked my ass out of there. Thank God.
Yeah,
Uh, and I didn't really know where. I didn't know how it was going to fit together, and that would to me that was kind of the allure of it. It's like, okay, well, part of the writing is the discovery of the story as it develops. Like,
yep,
I'm a pantser in that way. I typically know where I'm going to start and I know where I'm going to end up. At least to begin, in the beginning, I do.
sure.
Doesn't always work out that way, but again, everything in the middle is, the the discovery. That's the sandbox aspect of it. Like I'm just making shit up, guys. uh,
It's good shit.
yeah, thanks.
We'll take it.
Um, so that's where it started.
Hmm.
And then as I began to develop and like, well, what if, the Color Out of Space, the movie had come out, and which if you haven't seen that, go
Hmm.
watch it. It's fucking awesome. Even if the director's a piece of shit, go, go watch that movie. Um, and that was inspiration. So like Color Out of Space, you've got a meteor that lands, that crashes into the earth on this farm. Like, okay, well, I really like that story, and what if there was a meteorite that had crashed into the earth, you know, a millennia ago, and it's been here for a long ass time,
Hmm.
and what if there were effects it had on people, and so that moon worshippers became meteorite worshippers. And I was hesitant to like write about another cult because that's what Devil's Creek is about. But I realized, a lot of HOAs are very cult-like. Even though I
Yes.
don't live in an HOA by choice, I don't want to. Um, I know people who do, and dealing with some of the folks who run their HOAs, it can be a nightmare if the wrong people
Yep.
are in charge. And there's this power trip that comes from this position where they can, just at will assess a fine on your house because your grass is 6 inches high and not 5. Um, as an example. Uh, so I wanted to explore that and, the cult like aspect of a community like this that's very much isolated by design from the town itself. And in the center, you have an association, the Fairview Acres Community Association. You have the guy running it, Arthur Peterson, who's
He's
our
great.
antagonist. But he's not. The challenge there was coming up with a villain who's not outwardly a bad guy.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of got him like hippied up a little bit, you know?
Yeah, he's an aging hippie who runs this organization, and he just wants everybody to be having a good time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
and the thing is, though, is that he wants to control how they're having it, and putting him at odds with a guy who just wants to be left the fuck alone and not included in anything was really compelling for me, because that's my nemesis, is the person's like, oh, Todd, come socialize, come to this party, come do this thing with all these other people you don't know. And for me, that's absolute hell. Like, if I don't know anybody at a thing, I don't go.
Yeah.
I've never made friends easily, so I wanted to explore that dynamic of these two guys eventually butting heads, and I wanted to do it in the backdrop of a cosmic horror story, because the thing about cosmic horror that speaks to me on a personal level is cosmic horror, in a nutshell. And I'm sure there are purists out there who are going to come after me and say, oh, you're fucking wrong.
I'll get over it.
That's fine. That's fine. This is just an opinion on my part, but I think cosmic horror, in a lot of ways, deals with humanity's helplessness, and in our insignificance. And trying to find, it's a bit like, I look at it as a bit like trying to find meaning in a meaningless existence. It's very much like an existentialist kind of approach to life in the universe. And having ancient alien beings that we would perceive as gods, fucking around with us just to suit, and not even directly, but their existence is a passive contagion almost, is, that is more likely to me than something like the Christian God, and, it's that futility. It's the futility versus our human drive to ascribe meaning to the meaningless. That really, I find it, ripe for exploration. And rather than go into space and talk about all the different gods and the pantheon and shit, I'm more interested in how they impact the human being. And that's what I want to explore, is the human element of cosmic horror. So, while I will say that the Sundowner's Dance exists in what I call my Southland mythos. The center of that universe, of which is Devil's Creek and the events there. That's where it starts, but all of it having to do with areas of Appalachia, because the Appalachian mountain range is the oldest mountain range in the world.
Is it really?
Yeah, you won't find I forget exactly what they're called. There's a certain kind of fossil you will not find in Appalachia, because it predates the existence of those creatures that made that fossil. And, I have a rough sense of, my pantheon, which is, exists adjacent to Lovecraft's own. If you've read Devil's Creek, I name drop Arkham, I name drop Necronomicon, much to some folks' chagrin, but fuck you, go write your own story.
What's wrong with the Necronomicon?
Nothing. It was just you can't mention this and then not say anything else about it ever again in the book. I'm like, well, if you come along with me over the years and explore the other work, I'm gonna fucking get to that.
You're like, have you heard of the Dark Tower series?
Yeah, yeah. Like this is a
Took me a
you know
little
this
while to go, wait a minute.
this is a sandbox for myself, for my stories. It puts everything in
Mm.
context. So like you'll have stories that reference other things. I don't know if you've gotten to the part yet, and this isn't really a spoiler, but there's a chapter or a scene where Jerry's watching TV and he's flipping through the channels, and one of the mentions is, what happened to the town in Devil's Creek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did
That
catch
gets
that.
mentioned on the
It
news,
was just
and
it's like a one sentence blurb.
yeah,
Yeah. Quick pass. I was like, wait a
but I
minute.
love shit. I love shit like that in the fiction I read for fun, and I wanted to kind of do my own thing. So, that's where that all ties together in the cosmic order element. And I've got a story that dates back, that explores the question of why Judas betrayed Christ,
Hmm.
and that exists in my universe.
In the same universe.
Yes.
Nice.
I try to explore these different scenarios in the context of the Southland, what I call the Southland.
Now, have you ever lived outside of Appalachia?
No.
Because you were uh, Kentucky and Pennsylvania, right? This is a
Yeah,
continuation.
yeah. Like the Poconos are an offshoot of the Appalachian Range.
Right.
And I'm kind of like in a valley. So
Gotcha.
I guess you could make the case that I don't live in Appalachia currently, but I think I do.
We won't let that happen.
That's fine. But like, yeah, I grew up in southeastern Kentucky, just an hour and a half from, I'm basically grew up in the foothills.
Gotcha.
And, that whole area, the South is fucking weird. It's weird.
It's pretty wild.
Objectively
It's a wild.
weird.
It's a wild corner of the
But
country.
there's also there's almost like a tribal aspect to it. There's a primal aspect to it.
Hmm.
And to say that, it sounds like I'm talking about, I'm just bullshitting you or kind of trying to play it up to make it sound spooky, but anybody who's lived in Appalachia knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There's an element to the area that almost has like a magic or a sense of foreboding. It could Part of that could be some of the isolation, because you have pockets of people living out there who still don't have electricity, still don't have running
Yeah.
water. They've been living like that since before the country existed.
Yeah.
And that's actually something I explore a little bit in the novel I just finished, Revelation Road, which is the follow-up to Devil's Creek. No ETA on that at the moment. But going back to Sundowner's Dance, I wanted to introduce this new thing in another part of Appalachia that I'm sort of familiar with. I've lived here for about 20 years, and I don't know the area super well because, again, I stay in my room. But I've been to the Poconos. That's actually something else that astute readers will catch. And this isn't a spoiler; it's just a little wink and a nod. Sundowner's Dance exists in the same universe as Tony Rapinoe's Moon Hill universe.
Well, and he got a little.
With permission.
He got a little shout out in there.
Yeah, like Tony lives up in the Poconos. I published his
Okay.
collection, Greetings from Moon Hill. And we'd always talked about, collaborating on something, and that never happened, but Sundowner's Dance was a little way to work that in. And you know because his weird fiction is phenomenal, and he's an author I wish more people would read. Anthony J. Rapino, go read his work. So, working that in, and it's actually, well, I won't say anything. That is a spoiler. Sorry, but
No, you're
uh,
good.
but yeah, like it. I feel like I've even lost the point of what I was talking about. Cosmic horror, essentially, but
Right. And then and
uh,
then I asked you a question about living in Appalachia, and then
yeah, yeah. So
I pulled you across the country.
it's fine. Um, but something that I always wanted to see, and I didn't know it. I didn't. I had access to what the bookstores had in
Mhm.
my little spot of the world growing up. So I had a book land, and that was pretty much the extent. Town library didn't have shit. Uh, you know,
And there's kind of an
asking,
inverse of that in this story. There's no bookstore.
yeah, but there is a library.
Yes, there is a library.
Um, so I kind of had to find my horror, and when I finally discovered Lovecraft in high school, I ate it up
Hmm.
because this was so vastly different from the horror I was used to reading, and it was challenging, and the concepts are what I was drawn to most.
Hmm.
And the thing that bothered me though is because I'd never been to New England at the time, I couldn't relate to it.
Hmm.
So I wanted to, like, always thought, wouldn't it be cool if there was, an adjacent pantheon set in Appalachia or influencing Appalachia in a way that, you know, manifests in all these weird, spooky ways.
Hmm.
And that's kind of where the Southland mythos was born in my mind. So like I try to nurture that cosmic horror and sprinkle that in, even if what I'm writing isn't directly supposed to be cosmic horror.
Oh, that's awesome. I don't know that I knew that about the mythos. Um, so one of the things that as a writer outside of the cosmic horror space, one of the things that's fascinated me about cosmic horror, much to the point I was making earlier about it, kind of like pulling all these different subgenres together, is that it seems like a lot of the it does a really good job of handling creatures differently. You've got these creature feature horror stories, these cryptid stories that have kind of been around for, they're dyed in the wool American horror stories. I was just interviewing Rob about, Bigfoot, for
Yeah,
example. But then when you look at something like this, it's like otherworldly creature horror in a certain way, and it feels like there's this propensity, sorry, toward toward the selection of tentacled creatures or worm-like creatures in cosmic horror. And I always wonder, like, is there a specific reason for that in not all cosmic horror, but in a lot of cosmic horror, where we have like these kind of, because it's different than if you look at the sci-fi community's perspective on aliens, for example,
yeah.
and by the way, none of this is, there's no rules on this stuff.
No,
We get to do what we want with it. Um, but it does feel like there's something uniquely horrifying about the way you represent them in this story. It's like the first description, uh, again, no spoilers, but let's say Jerry has his first true mega social event with the association. And in that event, he sees for the first time what he perceives to be these elements of the
yes.
town. And I remember going, "Oh God." And it's so much more disturbing to me to see that than it would be to see like a Jersey Devil or like, Bigfoot, for example. I'd be like, "Oh, Bigfoot."
Yeah.
But like when you see that, it looks like it's so much more out of place. Like that should not be here, kind of thing.
Yeah, I again, I try to focus on the human element. So like if these people are being influenced by something otherworldly, like what would that look like realistically?
Mm,
Not, and it's not all tentacles all the time.
right.
I mean, tentacles exist, don't get me wrong. I'm all about the tentacles, but I try to think about that in the Cronenbergian sense of like what would that do to the body if, say, one of these things were to get inside you.
Right.
to me that there's the horror of the parasite, horror of the invader, you know, these unknown things that, you know, can get inside you, make you sick, or, you know, influence you in other ways. And also, I just try to come up with something that hasn't been done before. Like you know, I like I said, all about tentacles and cosmic horror, but you know, there's you try to think of what an alien might look like, and I mean, so there's, you know, there's an amorphous blob. It's like a giant amoeba, but it has consciousness, you know. And also, like, you have to take into consideration, like, what if this thing is appearing in the way that, and being described in a way that people can process, but there's more to it than that. It's
Right.
bigger on a scale that you can't comprehend because it's so large. It's like if I tell you that, you know, 1 trillion is an actual number, you can't fathom what that looks like.
Yeah. Imagine 1 trillion
Yeah,
things.
like what? I wouldn't
Yes.
even know where the fuck to begin. I mean, seriously, I can't even imagine 1 million things.
Yeah.
So to have something of that scale presented
Mm.
to you, you know, it's going to look like something else than what it is because it's the only way your mind can make sense of it.
Hmm. There's that horror element to the loss of
Yeah.
agency, that I immediately, like, you know, I was like, and again, no spoilers, but I was I'm sitting there going, "Oh God, how do you deal with that parasitic loss of agency that comes along with um, some of these elements of cosmic horror?" And it makes it even more terrifying when you realize it's something you know and understand less than maybe something like an actual, like, earthborn illness, you
Yeah.
know, like a
And
virus or some type of parasite that's born of the
in
earth.
that way, you know, I wanted to mirror dementia because, in a sense, you are basically trapped in your own mind. You are at the whim.
Hmm.
The thing that helps you perceive reality is malfunctioning, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it
Yeah.
happens to get worse when the sun goes down, you know, in some cases, that's not always. Um, you know, so I kind of wanted to parallel that feeling with what happens, you know, is happening to the residents of Fairview.
Excellent. Love it. Well, I don't want to I don't want to get too far too much further without asking you if there was any music that inspired this latest round of this book, because I know you had started it years back. And did you find that you were, you know, more or less inspired by the same thematic music when you started this thing than when you finished it?
Well, I have a playlist. I create a playlist for every project I work on, and they are public.
I didn't
I'll send
I was gonna say I don't know that I noticed if there was one in the back of the book or not.
no, but I'll
Okay.
send you the link. You can put it in the notes and stuff. But
Okay. Cool.
uh, so yeah, there's a playlist. It's about 6 hours long if you want to listen to it, you know, start to finish. It's a mixture of oldies throughout the decades and also has some contemporary stuff. And like, I select music for a project that fits the mood of what I'm trying to write about. And sometimes it's on
Right.
the nose, and sometimes it's not. It's just a moody piece. To give you like a selection of like the first 4 tracks, Answers in Your Soul by the Church of the Cosmic Skull, People Are Strange by the Doors, I Sat by the Ocean, Queens of the Stone Age, and I'm Not From This World by Nine Inch Nails.
Oh,
Uh,
great. That's
but
great
then
variation.
you know, it also, the playlist ends with Carnival of Rust by Poets of the Fall, Through the Eyes of Ruby, the acoustic version by the Smashing Pumpkins, A Night Like This by The Cure, and the final track, which is, you know, referred to in the book, is Love Will Tear Us Apart by Joy Division. But in there,
Yes, I did notice the Joy Division reference, and I was like, "Ooh," because that, you know, he Jerry comments on the music that
yeah,
his wife liked to play. And I thought that's a cool addition to the lineup that she
Yeah,
had.
so like you've got the Stones, you've got the Beach Boys, you got Queensryche, you got Pink Floyd, and next to them you've got Velvet Revolver and Foo Fighters and Tori Amos and Gary Newman, and it's again, it's a mixture of tracks that really put me in the mood to write the story.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I mean, there are, because the elderly folks, in the book, I listen to a lot of what I consider oldies. It may not be oldies for some folks; it might be contemporary for them.
Right.
But I also tried to explore oldies not just from a certain decade, multiple decades. So 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. 90s even are represented on this list.
It's a great list.
Thank you.
So now I can't wait to put on the Todd Keisling 6-hour run. I'm such a slow reader that I probably would have had to play it twice to listen to it while I read the book. But I'm a notoriously slow reader. It's like chewing food.
So am I.
Oh, that's great. I love it. Random question about the playlists. What kind of Queensryche we talking about? We talking Operation Mindcrime? We talking?
So I'm actually relatively new to Queensryche. This is Silent Lucidity. I mean, they're probably their best known track. But it fits.
Sure. Okay,
it fits.
It does fit. Excellent. And I'm not sure if Constance from Spirit Box made its way onto that list.
No.
But that is a song that is about dementia. That would be a great complementary piece to that to that list. And the video is fantastic. It's all about this lady who's suffering from dementia, and her family is trying to pull it together. And there's this brilliant part at the end of this song where the music is coming backwards.
Oh wow!
And you're seeing everything unraveling for her right at the very end. Cool. And it's like, oh, I can't watch that video without getting all messed up. So good. All right. And then, well, we talked a little bit about AuthorCon. So AuthorCon, March 28th through 30th.
Yeah, it's the last weekend of March.
Right. Yeah. Here in Williamsburg, Virginia, which I live 20 minutes from that hotel.
Nice.
Yeah. Do you have any other events coming up? Or is AuthorCon the
AuthorCon is one of the big events I'm doing this year. I'm also doing horror on Rappahannock in May. That's right. I'm doing StokerCon in Connecticut in June. And I'll also be doing the Merrimack Valley Halloween Book Festival outside of Boston in October. Now, between that, I've got multiple events lined up in April or lined up from the release of the book through May. I'll be at Doylestown Bookshop here in Pennsylvania for Independent Bookseller Day. That's kind of my launch day. It's a few days after the release.
Excellent.
I'll be at Vortex Books. I've got an event in the works with Stanza Books in New York. And more to come, I'm sure.
Excellent. Well, we will see each other at AuthorCon. Horror on the Rappahannock, which is in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and be at StokerCon as well. So this is cool. We'll get to hang out a little bit, and some of that'll be pre-launch and some will be post-launch. So we'll see if Todd's wearing big fancy duds and chains and stuff at the later events after his massive success with the Sundowners dance has settled on him. Todd over here. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. I can't see anyone over there. Who's this? I just kid. So is there anything you want to leave? Any parting shots, recommendations, cool book you've read recently that you want to share with people on the way out?
Man. Let me think for a second.
And I know this is a trick question because you've been holed up like literally face down in your own manuscript.
Yeah, so. I've been making a concerted effort to like read arcs and stuff that people have sent me this year, because I'm very bad about, reading them timely. Uh, Puppets Banquet by Valkyrie Lofcrew. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Wow.
That comes out from Tenebris. I blurbed that book and it's trippy as fuck. It's weird, gory, and yeah, just weird.
Awesome.
Below the Grand Hotel by Cat Scully, that's coming out from Clash in, don't remember if it's coming out next month or if it's in May. It's one of the M months. That I really enjoyed that. And currently reading Crafting for Sinners by Jenny Kiefer, which comes out later this year, I believe. If you haven't read her stuff, definitely check out her first novel, This Wretched Valley.
Yeah, she's great.
And yeah, like those that come to mind. Like I mentioned, Laurel Hightower. If you want a good place to start with her, read Crossroads or The Day of the Door. Day of the Door is my personal favorite.
I really liked Crossroads, but I've got Day of the Door just staring at me, and I'm dying to get into it.
Day of the Door. That one hit pretty close to home for me. Tony Rapino, Anthony J. Rapino is his official author name, but Greetings from Moon Hill is a collection, and I loved it. I'm not saying that because I published it, but it's just a fantastic collection of weird fucking stories. He also wrote probably my favorite piece of zombie fiction, called Soundtrack to the End of the World. I don't know if it's currently available because it was a Bloodshot book, but hopefully that comes into print soon if it isn't already. I wrote the foreword for it, and great, unique take on the zombie story that are so hard to come by these days.
Yeah, I was just lamenting that this morning, actually.
So definitely check those out. Another author I'll put on your radar is Nikki Nelson Hicks. She's a Tennessee author who writes a lot of folky, magic and pulpy stuff. Definitely check out her work. And Cat Silva, of course. If you haven't read, Undead Folk, you're missing missing out on everything.
I love that series.
I haven't read the second book yet. I need to because I want it before I get the third one. I got to read the second one. But
I think Dead Folk may have been my favorite voice of hers, actually. Yeah, which is kind of funny because I read Undead Folk and I was like, oh, this is great. And then when I read Dead Folk, I was like, oh, this. She's got this wonderful voice in the opening of that book. Yeah, really good. And I've got Nothing Land sitting here, waiting to be cracked into.
Nice.
But if it makes Kat feel better, I'm sure she doesn't mind that I'm not reading her story because I'm reading yours.
I hope she doesn't mind.
It's in the hopper. Hers is a quick read, though. The thing with Cats, though, this is just my advice to the people that read that series, is to take your time with those words because they're tight, short novellas, but there's a whole lot going on in there, and you got to just kind of chew on those words so that you really don't miss anything because Kat gives you so many great gifts in there. So excellent. All right. Well, Todd, thank you so much for spending time with this, talking about the Sundowners Dance. Anyone who needs information on where to get it, you guys go check out the Shortwave Publishing website. Stay in contact with Todd. Todd, what's the best place to find you on your website?
My website is a repository of information. You can contact me through there. I am also active on Blue Sky. Just look for Todd Keisling. I'm on there. I'm also on Instagram, but as soon as there's a better alternative, I am dumping Meta altogether. So
gotcha.
Instagram, Blue Sky, my website, those are the best places.
Perfect. All right, guys, we'll go out and grab your copy of the Sundowners Dance, and trust me, you'll enjoy it. And Todd, thanks so much for spending time with us today, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Thanks for having me, man.